This program is presented by the Fromm Institute for Lifelong Learning at the University of San Francisco. The Fromm Institute, keeping up with the times no matter when.
You think? it's so cute. It's so cute. It's so cute. All right. So once again, we're going to go back in time in order to take a few steps forward. So who is this? It's Alexander the Great. Yes, very, very good. And who is, here we go, Alexander. You'll notice that he lived about 900. Yes, one more time. The addition, the math, it's actually not beyond me. 900 years before Muhammad. And who is the man who's looking so unhappy? It's the Persian emperor. And the Persian emperor on the right is being defeated by Alex yet again. Alexander again lived in the 300s, and the Greeks and the Persians had been fighting for over 150 years. Why? Well, because the Persians wanted to take over the Greek world, and the Greeks thought this was a terrible idea. And so they resisted several invasions, and that creates a certain amount of animosity. And so, our picture of the Persian Empire is actually colored very much by the Greek view of the empire, of the Persian Empire, because again, our history traditions come from the Greeks. And even in many modern textbooks, the Persians are not very well represented. But in fact, the Persian Empire was an extremely well-run, very well-organized empire that provided for its many, many peoples, different ethnicities, about 200 years of stability and prosperity. And then along comes Alexander the Great, a natural and a brilliant general at the head of ever larger armies. He defeats in just 6 years, he defeats the Persian Empire, and in the next 6 years, that is 12 years total, he creates the largest empire this part of the world has ever seen. Now, the reason why I mention this is because Alexander's conquest of this very, very vast region also means that there's a tremendous Greek migration into this eastern region as well. Alexander, wherever he goes, builds new cities. And many of those cities are called Alexandria. The most famous, of course, is one of the first that he established here in Egypt. Again, you see it to the west of the Nile Delta. But as he traveled through these regions, he kept founding Alexandria, right? Many of these cities actually still exist today. For example, here you will see on the right-hand side the Indus River, and near the shoreline where the Indus meets the Arabian Sea, he also established an Alexandria, which is still today a thriving city known as Karachi. But it actually is a city that Alexander established. Now, what this means, excuse me, is that with these new cities, and these cities were meant actually to be Greek only, and these Greek cities therefore became the pillars of this new empire, which, however, did not last very long. Because as you see from his life dates, Alexander dies at the advanced old age of 33. His vast empire immediately breaks apart into an enormous power struggle. This involves not only families, it not only involves generals, it also involves women. His mother, his wives, his sister, they're all involved in this enormous power struggle because what's at stake? Mastery over the known world. So obviously, again, the power struggles are very, very vicious. So again, his empire breaks apart. You can see here, I'll get different colors indicate. that we have here, for example, the famous Ptolemaic Egypt, that is, the Egypt that is held by Alexander's general Ptolemy, the vast Seleucid Empire held by his general Seleucus, and again, further fragmentation in the Greek world. Now, the significance of this is that over the next generations, that fragmentation continues. But who is the ruling class? It's only Greeks, which means that as the more countries that develop, the more job opportunities are available. Do you see? Because there are more governments that split and have to be reorganized. And so in this vast region, again, this vast region, the post-Alexander Empire area, the Greeks are the armies. The Greeks are the government. They are the officials. They are the bureaucracy. They are the artists. They are the upper classes. So, what do you think is the international language of this entire region? It's Greek. If you want to be able to do business, if you want to trade, you have to know Greek. Now, we have a name for this. We call it the Hellenistic era. What this means is that it is a Greek-dominated international civilization. Again, a Greek-dominated international civilization, the Hellenistic civilization. Again, the Greeks are the ruling classes over all of these areas, Egypt, Babylon, the Persian regions as well. Why is this significant? Because the Greeks were a brilliant civilization. They were brilliant in math. Just one example, they discovered pi. Apple pie. No, they discovered pi, sorry, all right? They were brilliant in medicine. They, for example, discovered the functions of the nervous system. They discovered there are different types of nerves, motor nerves, for example, sensory, etc., etc. Again, they were brilliant in the arts, of course, these incredible statues, the Winged Victory of Samothrace, the Laocoon, for example. Again, these are all Hellenistic statues. And they were brilliant in technology as well. Not only the Archimedes screw, which moves water uphill, for example, from one canal system to another, but they also experimented with steam engines, and they built the first jet propulsion machines. This is the most advanced civilization in the ancient world, and it dominated Egypt and Persia. And so gradually, of course, over the course of time, this Greek elite, again, it continues to be reinforced generation after generation. Let me just move back here very quickly for a moment, because you'll see the black Italy here on the far left is the world that the Romans are conquering. You may have heard me mention before, wealth attracts, and it always attracts the wrong people. In this case, the Hellenistic civilization is enormously wealthy. Egypt's wealth, the Ptolemaic wealth, is legendary. The wealth of Persia is legendary. Again, in all these various regions, again, tremendous wealth. And of course, it attracts the wrong people, which are the Romans. And so gradually, as the Romans conquer more and more of this Greek world, including Egypt, what do all these hundreds of thousands of Greeks do? Most of them flee to the east. Yet again, do you see? In other words, this eastern region continues to get migration waves, generation after generation. And this is all leading up to something. Just a moment, all right? So again, we have this great Greek-dominated international civilization. All right, now, this is the city of Alexandria, for example. Again, it was one of the great cities of science in this Hellenistic world. It was originally built for Greeks only. For several generations, at the very least, Egyptians were not even allowed inside the city. And perhaps nothing was more symbolic of the wealth and the advancement of this city than the lighthouse. You may have heard of the Lighthouse of Alexandria, the Pharos, as it was known, an enormous building, just again as a symbol of the great technological advances. On this very, very high tower, enclosed, there was a fire which burned day and night. Around the fire, there was a track. And on this track ran a metal wheel, a sort of a metal circle on wheels, and it had mirrors on it. And so as it moved, the heat, you see, would move it, right? Because it would catch these convex mirrors, and the mirrors would move around the fire. The fire would then catch, the light would catch in the mirrors, move back and forth across the mirrors to accentuate, to make it stronger, and then it would come through a break in those mirrors, and it would flash this beam of light out to sea. You could see it 50 miles away during the day. It was again one of these great technological accomplishments of this civilization. So again, the Hellenistic civilization, an international Greek-dominated civilization. It is this civilization which is the foundation of the Sassanid Empire. Yes, it's a Persian-led empire, but it still has this Greek culture that it is absorbing, and there still are many, many Greeks in this culture. It is also the foundation of the Byzantine Empire to the west, which again is also Hellenistic. And both, of course, ultimately are conquered by the Arab, Bedouin, Muslim armies. Now, for Byzantium, again, it's the empire on the left. Byzantium is a continuation of the Roman Empire. It's a continuation of the Hellenistic civilization. Again, this is one of the reasons, I mentioned this to you, I think, 2 weeks ago, that under the Emperor Justinian, the official language of the Eastern Roman Empire, of the Byzantine Empire, changes from Latin to Greek. It makes perfect sense because it's a Hellenistic world, you see, and Greek international world. But it's also a Christian civilization. And there is this really annoying commandment. You know there are 10. It's not the one about adultery. It's not the one about theft. No, it's number 2. Thou shalt not create any images of man, of birds, of beast, of fish. It seems, and it was often interpreted as being a commandment which also excludes the visual arts. Because what is sculpture but making images? What is painting but making images? And this created, again, tremendous crises for this Byzantine Empire. But if you take a look at the Hagia Sophia, again, this Church of Holy Wisdom in Constantinople, you may recall that it is actually completely covered with images. We call them icons, which is the Greek word for image. How honest can you get? So what is the reason for this? Is because this Greek culture is stronger than the religion. The culture transforms the religion. The Greek traditions of pictorial arts are so powerful that the religion morphs to accept it. Again, you know that we, as humans, can rationalize anything. So rationalizing art, I mean, that's actually really easy. You don't even have to really try very hard. Okay, so again, this is Byzantium. This is the Hagia Sophia. Now again, the same thing happens in the Sassanid dynasty. Again, it's a Greek foundation. It's got Persian elements as well. And it continues on. For example, the story that I told you about Ctesiphon. You see this tremendous structure here. It is made possible by a grant from the it's made possible again by the knowledge of the Greeks. Again, these very, very sophisticated, very technologically, very advanced Greeks. Therefore, this Sassanid art, which I showed you a couple of weeks ago, you can actually see, if you are familiar with Byzantine art, you will see very strong similarities. Why? Because they both have the same foundation. Again, it is this Hellenistic foundation. You see these kinds of griffins in Hellenistic art, and you see these kinds of griffins in Hellenistic art, and you can catch Hellenistic glimpses here as well. So, that was the warm-up. Okay. And now it's story time. All right. I want to tell you a story from a long, long time ago. It's an ancient story, but it's relevant to Islam. How's that for a transition? Thank you. Okay. So once upon a time, a long, long time ago, there was a Muslim holy man, a very religious man, who was walking through the wilderness desert. And since it was even hotter than usual, he sought shade near an overhanging cliff. And then as he stood there in the slight cool of the shadow, he noticed a crevice. And so he went over to the crevice because it was a little cooler, and he noticed there was actually cool air coming out. And so he squeezed into this crevice, and he discovered a very large and very cool cave. And he rested here in this wonderful, refreshing coolness. And when his eyes became accustomed to the darkness, he looked deeper into the cave, and he noticed a shape that could not possibly be natural. And so he walked over to it, his footsteps echoing ominously. And he saw that it was a large chest. And when he opened the heavy lid, and oh, those hinges protested very loudly, he saw inside that it was filled with gold coins. And with a cry, he let the lid shut. He fled back into the hot desert, and he ran away as fast as he could. Now, in this desert place, there also lived 3 robbers. They were ferocious, and they were dangerous men. They had already been here in this wilderness desert for several months, hiding among the cliffs and the rocks, and of course, assaulting travelers and caravans and stealing things. And so on this day, they were hiding, waiting for the next victim, when suddenly they saw this holy man running as if for his life, and there was nobody behind him. Well, that was puzzling, intriguing, something you don't see every day. And so they emerged from their rocks and stopped him and asked him, "What are you running away from?" And he says, the devil, my brothers, the devil." Now, the 3 robbers could not see anyone. They couldn't see anything on the horizon remotely resembling anything looking like a devil. And so they said, "Well, show us what caused you such fear." And the holy man looked at them with stricken eyes. He didn't want to go back. He feared the cave, but he feared them more. And so he led them back towards the cave, explaining what he had seen and begging them not to go near it. The robbers were, of course, very intrigued. And when the holy man showed them where the crevice was, they forced him to join them as they entered into the cave. When the robbers saw the chest and opened it, they were astonished by the enormous amount of gold. They were so delighted that, they plunged their arms to it, they would throw it up into the air. It was, the classic expression of joy. And they didn't notice the hermit sneak out of the cave, slip away, and hide in another crevice. The robbers could not believe their good fortune, and they began to discuss what to do with all this gold. Well, obviously, they were going to divide it equally into 3 parts. But men arriving at the next city, far off, but city nevertheless, men arriving with large amounts of gold would cause commotion, curiosity, envy, perhaps more. In other words, it might put their lives into danger. And by the way, they also needed to find the holy man and kill him. I mean, seriously, you don't want to leak for this kind of information. And so they decided that one of them would go to the city on the edge of the wilderness, take with him a little bit of gold, buy food, other necessities, and then come back while the other 2 searched for the holy man and killed him. Then they would meet at the cave at sunset. One of the robbers volunteered, the others agreed, and so with a little bit of gold, he ran off towards the city. And while he ran, he thought to himself, "When I am in the city, I can eat as much as I want. Then I will poison the rest of the food, and when I come back and it kills the 2 of them, I'll get all the gold." Great idea. Okay. And while he was away, his companions, searching in vain for the holy man, were also thinking. And they thought, well, when the first robber returns with food, we'll kill him, and then we only have to divide the wealth into half. So as soon as the first robber returned, laid out the food on the floor of the cave and was distracted, the other two robbers fell upon him and killed him. They threw the body into a dark corner of the cave, and then they sat down to eat the food. No sooner were they finished than they began to feel cramps, which got worse and worse. They writhed in agony as the poison did its work, and they gasped and screamed until the poison killed them. The cave fell silent. The bodies eventually decayed into skeletons, and the treasure remained in this cave for a long, long time, until one day, this story is called in the Muslim world, How Evil Leads to Evil. At any rate, last week, we talked about Ali, the son of Muhammad, who had finally become caliph, that is, successor to Muhammad, the fourth successor to Muhammad. He had encountered, as you recall, considerable resistance, and for several different reasons, which I again recounted to you last week, he decided to move the capital, the political capital, from Medina to the city of Kufa, which is today in the country of Iraq, again along the southern borders of Iraq. Now, we talked again about the murder of Ali, the murder of his two sons, Hassan and Hussein, and the rise of the Umayyad dynasty. Again, the man with the name that you probably wished you could have named your grandson, Muawiyah Umayyad. Come here this instant. Okay, at any rate. Again, Muawiyah Umayyad, also from a family from Mecca, but again, he was related to Uthman. Uthman, as you recall, is murdered as well. And Muawiyah Umayyad is appointed governor of Syria. It is Muawiyah Umayyad and his son who are generally implicated in the murder of Ali and in the murder of both of his sons. The reasons for the murders? So there is no possible opposition to their being caliph again in this growing empire. Again, this empire of the Muslims, which is called the Caliphate. And since Muawiyah Umayyad was the governor of Syria in Damascus, the political capital now shifts from Kufa to Damascus. And so therefore, Muawiyah Umayyad establishes a dynasty. Again, the Umayyad dynasty and the Caliphate. It is one of his great-grandsons, Abd al-Malik, also from this family, who built the famous Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem. As you remember, it's one of the oldest Muslim buildings in the world. Well, actually, I should rephrase that. One of the oldest Muslim sacred buildings in the world. That I think would be much more accurate. Again, because you recall that the Muslims are, of course, Arabs, the Bedouins. They're nomadic people. They don't generally build buildings. But again, as you recall, it is modeled after Byzantine buildings. Eight-sided, very, very common for Byzantine architecture this time, eight-sided octagons. The tile work, too, again, is very typical Byzantine. The Byzantines were famous for their tile work. And notice, once again, that second commandment. Remember, I mentioned it to you last week. Again, the Muslims, too, again, these Arabic Muslims, these first Muslims, also honored the second commandment. That is, no images of humans, of animals, of birds, of fish. And therefore, again, the decorations are primarily geometric, and the script, again, the calligraphy of this, again, very, very beautiful, beautiful language. Notice also the dome, again, also very typically Byzantine, and the Corinthian columns and the striped arches. Again, all of this is very Byzantine, even though it's now the first Muslim architecture. All right, here again, the interior of the dome, the paradise essentially, and the rock from which Muhammad on his horse person, again, this magical creature, went up into heaven. Again, it commemorates the night journey of Muhammad. Okay, so let me just spool forward a little bit, right there. Boom, boom, ding. Very good. Okay, so again, it commemorates Muhammad's night journey. So let me show you some pictures of Muhammad's night journey. Here, to begin with, is a picture of an episode in Muhammad's life. These episodes accumulate over the centuries. What this means is either these stories were oral and gradually anchored in writing, or they were made up over the course of the generations. Okay, but anyway, so in this particular story, Muhammad and the Quraysh try to rebuild the Kaaba, and no one can decide, no one can agree as to who gets the honor of lifting the black stone back into this altar that they're reconstructing or that they're repairing. And so Muhammad comes up with the ingenious solution that the rock will be put on a piece of cloth, and then a representative of every tribe will hold the cloth, and together they will put it into place. It's an ingenious solution, of course, and it cements Muhammad's reputation as a wise man. Then, as you recall, Muhammad receives messages from the archangel Gabriel. Notice that in this particular picture, Muhammad has cloth over his face, because again, he is not worthy enough to look upon the face of an angel. Muhammad then teaches others. And then we have again this famous visit by the strange creature, horse and man, half angel as well, Burak. And here we go, Muhammad's night journey with the archangel Gabriel and the Burak. Let me show you some more pictures of what he sees. A while back when I was doing, I know this is a total tangent. I do tangents. When I was doing research on Angkor Wat in Cambodia, there are galleries of heaven and there are galleries of hell. So to which galleries do all the tourists go? Hell. No one's interested in heaven. Okay. And so the same thing seems to be true here. We have some very elaborate depictions of hell. For example, Muhammad and Burak and Gabriel see a demon punishing shameless women. And how are they shameless? They have shown their hair to strangers. Here we see women hanging from hooks thrust through their tongues because they mocked their husbands. And here is a red demon torturing women by hanging them through hooks through their breasts because they gave birth to illegitimate children. Then Muhammad visiting paradise. He looks down, and riding on the camels are the fabled virgins who come to the heroes and the martyrs. And finally, Muhammad and the angel Gabriel on the right talk with Abraham, who is in paradise, on the left. And then Muhammad returns here on his prayer rug to Mecca and Medina. Now, these are the pictures that, again, illustrate this particular story. All right. So, the man who built this, and you are getting the impression, aren't you, that I like to do this in my classes at the conservatory as well. I like to construct a building block, and then move on, and construct another one, and then move on, and construct another one, and then eventually they do get linked. At any rate, the man who built this, the Dome of the Rock, again, Al-Malik, is also credited with not only centralizing the government of this vast empire, but also making Arabic the international language. That's significant, because up until this time it had been Greek, do you see? And then he begins a new offensive against Byzantium. You will see on your timeline, for those of you who have it on the front page again, a recap of the Umayyad dynasty, which I had presented to you last week as well. And I wanted to turn now to the non-Muslims in this very, very large empire that the Muslims are creating. Initially, Umar, for example, Al-Malik as well, for example, they well, actually, they didn't have any choice to tolerate. One has to keep in mind that these Arab Bedouin Muslim armies that invade both the Sassanid Persian and the Byzantine Christian empires are relatively small in number. They make up for that in ferocity, but they're very small in number, which means that most of their subjects are of a different religion, essentially Christian, Jewish, Zoroastrianism. Again, Zoroastrians, are they? And so, initially, again, for these people, they are called the Zimmis. And I do not know why when we transliterate this, we use the DH, but that's the way it goes. Again, these are called the Zimmi. They are, in other words, protected people, the protected ones. And they pay a tax, a jizya, which is a poll tax. In other words, you get yourself a poll and you bring it to the tax authorities, right? Actually, it's a head tax. You bring your head to the, no, okay, I'm stopped now, all right. It's a head tax. In other words, every adult has to pay a tax. The idea behind this is you help to offset the costs of the government, all right. Now, again, initially, the Jews and the Christians were tolerated. And indeed, as the government, again, is taken over by the Muslims, there are many, many Christians and many, many Jews that work for the Muslims. They work for Umar, they work for Uthman, and they work for the Umayyads as well. And very few people actually have a problem with this. In other words, this is one of the great ironies. The Muslims take over a large region of the Mediterranean and Middle Eastern world, but it's not really so much about conversion. It's not so much about conversion, not at this particular point. One of the followers of Al-Malik pronounces that only non-Muslims must pay taxes. Okay, you know what's going to happen, right? Come on, we're Americans. We love to pay our taxes. So again, okay. So what happens? When he pronounces the fact that only non-Muslims have to pay taxes, hundreds of thousands of people convert to Islam, right? So they don't have to do what? Pay taxes. Exactly. Very good. All right. Finally, under the Umayyads, again under this Umayyad dynasty, again here in the Caliphate, the expansion continues. Again, expansion continues. It now moves to the west. This is an older map, but it works for me. All right, it's a much older map, but I like the colors. I like the colors because there's a specific reason for it. Again, this is the Byzantine Empire shortly before it loses all of these lands, again, to the Muslims. But if you follow North Africa, you will see Carthage and these pink areas. These pink areas are the Vandal kingdom. That is, the Germanic peoples, the Vandals, have carved out a kingdom for themselves. And you will see that here in the Iberian Peninsula, there are two more Germanic kingdoms. One is the Visigoths, the Western Goths, and the other is the Suebi. Again, three Germanic kingdoms. And when the Muslims now invade North Africa, they follow the same procedure as they did in the Byzantine and Sassanid regions. That is, they first conquer the nomadic people because they're the ones they know the best. It takes only a little bit of conquest, and then it's an alliance. And then they're technically Muslims, and then you generate new armies. In other words, these armies are self-generating as they move across North Africa. And as you see on your handout in 711, it's under, one moment, again on your handout on the front, under Al-Walid. Under Al-Walid I, around about 700, again 711, begins the invasion of Europe. Again, the invasion of Europe begins. The people that had been conquered here in North Africa included people such as the Berbers, who now also accept Islamic rule, and they join these armies and move further west. Now, this area right here, again, North Africa, around Carthage, was called by the Romans the province Mauritania. And so the people in Mauritania, for short, were called Moors. And so gradually, as the Muslims move into Europe, the Europeans call them Moors Because they come from Mauritania. Do you see that's actually how it starts? So again, in 711, these armies, these Muslim armies, strengthened by Berbers and by new groups, again, move across this very, very narrow again, this very, very narrow water straits that we today call Gibraltar. At this time, it was still called the Pillars of Hercules. Now, for those of you who have been to this region, again, where southern Spain meets northern Africa, actually even just the eastern coast, the southeastern coast of Spain, is really interesting because as you drive along the coast towards Gibraltar, you find occasionally these enormous rock mountains, just literally sort of sitting along the side of the coast. It looks as if some enormous giant had just basically hurled them into the air and they just plow into various parts of the coast, which of course is exactly what the legends said, that a giant had hurled these rocks through the sky. And one of those rocks is, of course, here in what today we call Gibraltar. Again, here is a topographic representation. You can see again several of these great rocks, and here is that rock. Now again, the Greeks and the people who lived in these regions called them the Pillars of Hercules. Again, they called them the Pillars of Hercules. The Berber general who leads the Muslim armies across this area was a man by the name of Tariq. And so when Tariq and this army entered into Spain, they rechristened this rock. They called it the Rock of Tariq, Jabal al-Tariq, from which we get Gibraltar. Do you see? Jabal al-Tariq again gives us Gibraltar. Here is an aerial view of Gibraltar today. You will notice, again, just for fun and because it's a wonderful tangent, that here is the airport. All right, and here are the streets that go across the runway. It's a lot of fun. You should check on YouTube, Landings in Gibraltar. It's very, very interesting. It's particularly interesting for the people along the beach here because the 737s, obviously 747 can't land here, but the 730s, I mean, they really sort of come like about 6 feet above your head. It's really a lot of fun. It's very exciting. Again, this is Gibraltar and Gibraltar and Gibraltar once again. Again, the Muslim general al-Tariq, Jabal al-Tariq, Gibraltar. Again, the origins of this name. So, what the Muslim armies, Berber armies, Moorish armies have done is they've conquered the Germanic Vandal kingdom of North Africa, and now they invade the other Germanic kingdoms on the Iberian Peninsula, and you can see they are successful. In just 5 years, they have conquered most of the Iberian Peninsula. And at the same time, this of course means that it now falls under the control of the Caliph of the Umayyad dynasty in Damascus. Notice how far this control now extends. And at the same time, there's another attack upon the city of Constantinople. Again, 717, 718, an attack upon this enormous city. And once again, the attacks are driven away. Why? Because of the walls. Again, this enormous, massive defensive system, plus, of course, these great underground reservoirs. So again, you will see on this map, arrows tell you a lot. Do you see those green arrows? Again, the green arrows being turned away from Constantinople. In other words, Constantinople is saved. And then the Muslim armies in the Iberian Peninsula now attack the next Germanic kingdom, the Germanic kingdom of the Franks. I'd like to point out, by the way, that once again, the colors and the dark lines are deceiving. These are very amorphous, very fragile kingdoms. But nevertheless, the Muslims now invade. You can see the green arrow from Spain with the Basques, and they go all the way to Poitiers. Again, to Poitiers tour almost to the Loire Valley before they are turned back by Charles the Hammer. That is, Charles Martel. Again, the Battle of Poitiers, Charles Martel, Charles the Hammer. In other words, he's not the king. He's basically the prime minister. But because he is so successful in turning away the Muslims, he and his son decide that maybe they should be king after all. And so indeed, eventually, they send the king off into a convent, into a monastery, and they take over themselves. Again, that's, of course, a simplification. That's basically how it works. All right, at any rate, so From this point on, again, the Frankish kingdom has been able to protect itself against the Muslims, and now begins the effort to drive the Muslims out of Spain. This is a very famous war. It's called the Reconquista. That means the reconquest of Spain for the Christians. Keep in mind, again, there are large populations still in the Iberian world. But again, this Reconquista, that is the reconquest of Spain, is a 750-year war. In other words, it's a war which, again, goes off and on for the next 750 years until the Muslims are ultimately driven out of Spain. Again, in this vast caliphate, Damascus is the central location. Again, it is the center of Sunni power. The followers of Ali, the Shia, and the increasing number of disagreements between these two groups, which again, every generation finds new reasons to renew old hatreds, finds new theological differences, finds new ceremonial liturgical differences. The Shia are concentrated more in the Iraq and Persian regions, and they are getting increasingly restless, which brings us to a man named Abbas. Abbas was the uncle of Muhammad, and from him continued to develop a clan that became known as the Abbasid family. Again, the Abbasid family. They had lived quietly under the Umayyads, although, again, the area that they are in, this is Iraq, is very, very restless. Intrigues continue, and eventually the Abbasid family joins the Shia opposition. And they castigate the Umayyad family in Damascus. Okay, so they're in Iraq, what we today call Iraq, they call it Mesopotamia. They're in Iraq, and they are castigating the Umayyad dynasty in Damascus. Now, this again very clearly shows another major shift, another major break in the Muslim world, which is very, very typical, again, across world history. Let me give you an example of a letter that is sent to Umar II of the Umayyad dynasty in Damascus. And this man in Iraq writes, "Beware of this world with all caution, for it is like a snake, smooth to the touch, but its venom is deadly. The more this world pleases you, the more be careful of it. For the man of this world, whenever he feels secure in any pleasure, the world drives him over into some unpleasant misfortune. And again, beware of this world, for its hopes are lies, its expectations false, its easefulness is harsh. And therein you are in peril of losing bliss. You are in peril of sudden calamity, painful affliction, or doom decisive. Hard is the life of a man if he is to be prudent, dangerous if he is comfortable. Be careful of catastrophe." You get the idea. Okay. Now, what you see here, for example, is what we today would call Muslim fundamentalism. I think fundamentalism is in some ways a misleading word, but it's definitely a strain of Islam, which you find in every religion, again, which takes its religion very seriously. It says, for example, again in this letter, it goes on to say, Muhammad bound a stone upon his belly when he was hungry, so it would hurt less. It goes on to say, Jesus used to say, "My daily bread is hunger, my badge is fear, my clothing is wool, my horse is my foot, my lanterns at night is the moon, my fire by the day is the sun. Fruit and herbs are the things which the earth brings forth. This is all I have." In other words, again, this emphasis on a very austere, simple, self-disciplined life. Again, what we call fundamentalism, but again, it takes its religion seriously. And from their point of view, the Umayyads clearly were not taking their religion seriously. Again, obviously, living in Damascus, very, very wealthy, very, very luxurious in their lifestyles. And so, increasingly, all different kinds of fault lines occur. All different kinds of fault lines. For example, non-Arabs versus the Arab supremacy, factional, tribal disagreements once again. And then there arises a very brilliant servant of this family, a man by the name of Abu Muslim. It means the father of the Muslims. He, of Persian origin, but a Muslim, organizes a revolt against this Umayyad dynasty. He organizes a revolt and he invades Damascus. The last Umayyad caliph is murdered, once again, in Damascus, and the head of the Abbasid family becomes the new caliph briefly in Damascus. He takes the name Abu al-Abbas, again, notice again the family relation, al-Safa, which means the shedder of blood. And he does shed blood because he exterminates the entire Umayyad clan. Hundreds of people, men, women, children, are slaughtered. Only one Umayyad prince escapes, and he escapes to the furthest reaches of the caliphate, which is Spain, where he refuses to accept this new dynasty. In other words, the Umayyad dynasty is wiped out, and we have a new dynasty, the Abbasid dynasty, which you see rules for about 500 years. Again, 750 to 1258 AD. Again, for approximately 500 years. One of these Abbasid rulers establishes a new city because their power is not in Damascus, their power is in Iraq. And so they decide to build a city near the ruins of Ctesiphon. And they call this city Baghdad. And then they move the government to Baghdad. And here a whole new world begins. Let's take a break and we'll continue. We're going to be winging over the generations, and we're just going to do a little hop, skip, and jump. For example, the second caliph, the brother to the shedder of blood, is Al-Mansur, as you see here on the screen. He again successfully consolidates, the empire consolidates this Abbasid dynasty. He cannot, of course, prevent the Umayyad prince who has escaped too far off Spain to resist him, and indeed, the Umayyad dynasty continues in Spain for several more centuries. This is why you often hear about the Umayyad Spain. Do you see? In other words, again, the Umayyad dynasty continues in Spain over several more centuries. But again, it is Al-Mansur who moves the capital from Damascus to Baghdad. I cannot stress how important this is. Because think, does it make a difference to a country where the capital is located? Absolutely, absolutely. For example, by moving to a new city in Mesopotamia near Ctesiphon means you're moving into the Persian world. Actually, it means you're moving into the Hellenistic Persian world. And what does this mean? That this Muslim culture very quickly gets absorbed by this Hellenistic Persian world. We call this phenomenon the conqueror becomes the conquered. You conquer a region, and then that region's culture completely transforms you. And that's exactly what now happens here in this new center. And again, you will see here on the map, Caliphate, Damascus, and then to the east, again, the city of Baghdad. This, again, is very, very important. Because what it means is that the Muslim center, political center, is in a Persian world. A Persian world that is already very well connected with itself, with families and structures that the Muslims have to deal with. Not very well, by the way. And so gradually, over the course of several decades, the Persians begin to move into this Muslim structure because these Persian families want to be part of the political system, for example. In addition, in other words, basically the Muslims get swamped. The Muslims get swamped. And what it also means is that gradually the Bedouin warriors are replaced by Persian aristocracy. The Bedouin warriors are replaced by Persian aristocracy, which means that the upper classes are ever more Hellenistic Persian. What it also means is that they are already accustomed to ruling large empires. They've had a lot of centuries of experience. And that means that the Muslim Caliphate takes on a whole new complexion. The shift to the east means that it grows increasingly Hellenistic Persian. Great bureaucracies begin to develop. Bureaucracies which, as you know, move very ponderously and slowly. And again, the Bedouin warriors basically just kind of get shoved aside, as the Persians sort of bring back their own power centers. Again, it's a major, major shift to the east. Again, this Islamic empire increasingly becomes what we call an Oriental empire. Again, very authoritarian. None of this kind of, equality of Muslims, for example. And obviously, it also has an effect upon Muslim art. Because remember, after I showed you the Dome of the Rock, I started to show you these pictures. And I'm sure there were a few of you who just wanted to raise your hand and say, wait! Second commandment, what's going on? This is what's going on. Because you see here in the Persian Hellenistic East, now the same thing is happening that happened in the Byzantine world. The Byzantines originally said no images, and then that Greek culture, it just takes over. And the Muslims say no art, and once again, this Persian world takes over. And this is why we have these pictures. Because you see, in spite of the second commandment is not strong enough to trump this culture. And that is why we have these pictures, do you see? Because again, in the Persian culture, pictorial representations take over. Again, these are all Persian. Persian pictures. Again, for example, this picture I showed you of Caliph Ali, remember? I did tell you that images are forbidden, but not in this world. This is the standard picture of Ali. It's actually a 2-story poster in Baghdad. Do you see? Again, Ali as the center. All right, a couple more points. Oh yes, also, the shift to the east, the shift to Baghdad, again from Damascus even further east, ultimately saves both Constantinople and the kingdom of the Franks, because these areas are now far less significant as far as the Muslims are concerned. In other words, it's a shift to the east. What this also means is that this empire centered in Baghdad, notice it's looking east, towards the Indian Ocean, towards Asia, towards the trade that is there. In other words, this is a monumental shift. Damascus to Baghdad, and the whole gravity moves to the east. And it fundamentally transforms the caliphate. It fundamentally transforms this great Muslim kingdom. All right. So, just as a little sidelight for fun, and because again it'll be relatively significant later on, in this world at this time, as cities are reorganized or as cities are built, it becomes ever more popular, ever more useful, ever more pragmatic to have separate districts for separate religious ethnicities. And so this is the city of Jerusalem, but this is true of Baghdad, it's true of many of the other Muslim cities. That is, they will have a Muslim quarter where the Muslims live, a Jewish quarter where the Jews live. They will have a Christian quarter where the Christians live, and then they will have an other quarter where the others live. It's kind of a joke, but it's not entirely true. Okay, anyway, so again, during the reign of this Abbasid dynasty, Islamic civilization reaches its zenith. I mean, it really does. Islamic civilization reaches its height. It is now centered in the richest provinces of the Parthian Empire, and it still has the richest provinces of the Byzantine Empire, an empire that stretches from Spain and North Africa all the way into Central Asia, moving into even the Chinese world. Anchored in great cities such as Damascus, Baghdad, and Cairo, a new city also established again near the pyramids. Just as a side note again, in these cities, the most impressive palace, of course, is the palace of the governor. And they, have, of course, also have a large mosque, and these, of course, too, become more and more beautiful. By 800 AD, the Islamic civilization is the leading culture in this part of the world. The Islamic civilization, by 800, is the leading civilization in this part of the world. It leads in science, in medicine, in the crafts, in trade, art, architecture, math, astronomy, all of this. So the logical question, certainly when I first read this a million years ago when I was an undergraduate, I said, that makes no sense. How can a culture of camel herders so swiftly become such a great civilization? And the answer is, they didn't. Do you see? This Islamic civilization is the Hellenistic Persian civilization, which again blends with the fact that this caliphate brings so many different cultures together, do you see? That you can actually have an interchange of ideas and commerce, and this is ultimately what allows this Islamic civilization. It draws upon far older civilizations that already exist. Now, Muslim society was technically a society of equality because Muhammad had said, all Muslims are brothers. But in reality, with this new Persian restructuring, you have very well-defined upper classes, ruling families, senior officials, tribal elites, etc., etc. Also, merchants enjoy very great status. And this is unusual because there are many civilizations where merchants are pretty down at the bottom of the totem pole. But since in this caravan culture of the Muslims, right, that merchants and trade were very, very important, it's logical that merchants would also, again, be very, very greatly revered. There is slavery. There's very extensive slavery in this Muslim caliphate as well. Again, generally, they're employed as domestic servants, for plantations, for work, and for pleasure. And I came across a consumer's guide to the ideal slave. So I thought I would share this with you. I don't think any of us will be buying a slave anytime soon, but it's kind of an interesting little how-to guide, and it's written, of course, by a Persian, of course. A father's instructions to his son. Now let me describe what is essential in purchasing slaves, both white and black. Understand that there are three essentials in the buying of slaves. First, the recognition of their good and bad qualities. Second, to look at their awareness of diseases. And third, knowledge of their class. Isn't that interesting? Because they will have the defects and the strengths of their class. He says in regards to their physiognomy, in other words, again, to their look, pay close attention. Look at the face, which is always open to view, whereas the body can only rarely be seen. Look at the eyes and the eyebrows. Follow the nose, the lips, the teeth. Lastly, look at the hair. The reason for this is that God placed the beauty of human beings in eyes and eyebrows, delicacy in the nose, sweetness in the lips and teeth, freshness to the skin. To all these, the hair of the head has been made to lend adornment because God created hair for decoration. Isn't that nice? I'd always wondered. At any rate, he goes on to say, inspect everything. Inspect everything. The most important thing, by the way, that he emphasizes is delicacy over beauty. Delicacy, delicateness is more desirable than beauty. Make sure, for example, that your slaves are strong enough to do the work, as I suppose a given. And then here we have the mark of the slave suited for employment in the women's apartments. All right. Now, in this Arabic world, initially, in the Bedouin world, women were always sort of separated out. Why? Because there was always a women shortage. And so it was very common to kidnap women. Actually, the Greeks did the same thing. They segregated their women to protect them because they didn't want their women to get kidnapped. In other words, you get the idea that there's often open season on women, right? If you can't get a wife, you just go and steal yourself one. Okay, very good. I am so glad we've moved beyond that. So where the women were kept was called the harem. Again, it means sort of like the separated place there. Naturally, if you have a number of women, and again, by now the traditions are once more to have concubines. In other words, women whose primary function is sex. And they are part of the harem as well. Actually, they are the primary part of the harem. And naturally, they also need supervision. And so, what kind of slave man do you want for the harem? He should be sour-visaged, have withered limbs, little hair, shrill voice, little feet, thick lips, flat nose, bowed figure, and a thin neck. There we go. Okay. Furthermore, his eyes have to be close together. Okay, anyway, so there, now you know it. Okay, and just a couple other very quick little points. Let me see. Oh, yes. Notice, again, the Dome of the Rock. Again, I'm putting little building blocks together here. Again, the Dome of the Rock. Notice that with this first major Muslim sacred building, there's something missing. Do you see what's missing? Yes, the minarets are missing. Here again, Medina and its many minarets. So the minarets, again, these little towers. Again, the minarets, the towers, all right, are a fundamental feature for mosques today. Apparently not originally. Interesting that minaret means lighthouse. It appears that minarets started to be built after the Muslims captured Alexandria. Do you see? And they saw this great lighthouse, and they thought, well, no, we need to call out for our people. We'll have a little lighthouse as well. And hence the minarets. Again, the little lighthouses. Again, in this Abbasid dynasty, it's ruled by a caliph from Baghdad, and the caliph is advised by advisors, a council, which is known as the divan. So the divan is not a couch, it's actually a council. The caliph himself often did not attend the meeting, or at least he didn't seem to. He would hide behind the screen and listen, which actually is very similar, of course, to the dowager empresses in the Chinese world, for example. The highest advisor was called a wazir, from which we get the word vizier. And do you know what that means? The vizier, essentially what we would call a prime minister. It means the bearer of burdens. Is that appropriate? It's entirely appropriate. All right. Now, very quickly, again, just as one example, very, very quickly in this Abbasid dynasty, again, that moves into this Eastern world, again, into this Persian world, a prominent family, the Barmaki family, begins to move into positions of power. We call them the Barmecide family. Again, they are a Persian Hellenistic family. And they gradually begin to dominate this dynasty more and more. The height of this Abbasid dynasty comes under the reign of the fifth caliph, a man very famous known as Harun al-Rashid. It means Aaron the righteous or Aaron the just. So Harun al-Rashid, again, he is the most famous of these Abbasid dynasties. Again, this is a time period of great prosperity. And what city is the center of this great dynasty and the center of this great prosperity? It is Baghdad. This is important to keep in mind because do the people of Baghdad still remember this today? Of course they do. Do you see? This is the great height, a great height again of this Abbasid dynasty. There is trade with Europe, with Central Asia, with Africa. He is again a great patron of the arts, and a Muslim historian describes Baghdad. Here is what he writes. There is no city in the world equal to Baghdad in the abundance of its riches, the importance of its business, the numbers of its scholars and important people, the distinction of its leaders, the distinction of its common people, the extent of its districts, the width of its boundaries, the great number of its palaces, the inhabitants, the streets, the avenues, the mosques, the baths, the Muslim baths. Where do the Muslims get their baths from? The Greeks. From the Greeks. The purity of its air, the sweetness of its water, the freshness of its dew and its shade, the temperateness of the summer and winter, the healthfulness of the spring and the fall, and its great, great crowds. In other words, Baghdad is Camelot. Right, okay. At any rate, again, a great and magnificent city. Naturally, under the reign of Harun al-Rashid, there are Byzantine ambassadors who come to visit, and they write about their experience going to the palace in Baghdad. It says that when they arrived, the number of eunuchs who attended in the palace was 7,000. 4,000 of them were white and 3,000 were black. The number of the chamberlains were 7,000. Further, the store chambers, in other words, the treasury, again, this is a very common phenomenon throughout the world history, is that rulers have treasuries. This is where they display the gifts and the plunder that they have acquired. And you don't just throw them into a closet, you put them on display. And so they come to these storehouses, again, these Byzantine ambassadors, and they say the jewels of the caliph are arranged in trays on steps and covered with cloths of black brocade. And then they discover that in the palace hall, where this great Harun al-Rashid reigns, there is a tree. It is a tree that is artificial. It is made out of silver. And it has in its leaves, whistling with every motion on these branches, birds that sing, mechanical birds that sing. Now, once again, the Bedouins have no tradition of this. This is a Persian Hellenistic tradition. Again, this technology that allows for these really amazing, amazing palaces. They write about how magnificent the rooms are, the clothes and get embroidered, ebony throne overlaid with gold and silver. And again, even on the throne, the Harun al-Rashid himself has 9 necklaces around his neck. Again, this tremendous magnificence, this great city of Baghdad. Again, it's important to keep in mind that this is what Baghdad was under the Abbasids. In other words, the caliphs, their families, and their elite had tremendous luxury. And is that offensive to anyone? It's offensive to very many Muslims. Because luxury offends the Islamic sense of humility and moderation. Alcohol was consumed in public, and this offended the Islamic prohibitions against drinking alcohol. It was rumored that Harun al-Rashid had over 1,000 concubines, and that offended Muslims as well. Divorce was common now in this Abbasid dynasty. That offended the Muslims. And so was homosexuality. It was common to have not only concubines, but also catamites. Catamites are little kittens. No, I'm kidding. Catamites are teenage boys. And that is once again the Greek traditions. Do you see that are working their way through? And so beneath all of this prosperity, obviously there are dangerous intrigues as well. Which brings us to the story of Jafar. Not the one you saw in Aladdin, in Disney, different Jafar. Okay, very good. So once upon a time, a long, long time ago, except it actually happens to be true, the Barmaki family, or the Barmecide family again, had become ever more part of this great power complex in Baghdad. They were at the height of their power. Their power was without limit, and Jafar, one of the reasons for this is because Jafar, again of this Barmecide family, was a very close personal friend of Harun al-Rashid. And so this is the story that goes with it. One day, while they were celebrating a wedding, Harun al-Rashid, again the great Abbasid Caliph, says to Jafar, Jafar, there is no one in the world dearer to me than you, and no one whose conversation is sweeter and more desirable than yours. Now my sister Abbasa holds in my heart a place not much inferior to yours. And I have considered the feelings that each of you inspire in me, and I have realized that I cannot easily dispense either with you or with her. For when you are absent, no pleasure is perfect in her company, and when I'm alone with you, her absence inspires the same regrets. I know only one way for this defect to be remedied. You need to get married. Then you can both be together with me all the time. And he says, you can enjoy this pleasure. I wish you to marry Abbasa and to give you by right this marriage, to pass your evenings with her, to see her, to be near her, whenever I am with you both. But there your privileges end. Which means they can be together as long as he's there. In other words, Jafar and his sis Abbasa can be together as long as Harun al-Rashid is there. But when he leaves, they have to separate. In other words, no sex. Because he wants control over who will be the next successor. He doesn't want anything to see that could complicate these matters. And so Jafar, of course, accepts these conditions, but Abbasa, not so convinced, because she finds Jafar very attractive, and she would really like to know him better. And so she's determined to win his love. And so she goes to Jafar's mother and asks for help. And who, of course, knows a son better than mom? Exactly, very good. And so she goes to Jafar's mother, and Jafar's mother weaves a plan. She tells Jafar, I have been told of a young slave girl who is living nearby. She has a royal education. She is lettered and learned, gracious and charming. Her beauty is beyond compare. Her figure perfect, and she has a wonderful, wonderful personality. In fact, she is a constellation of perfections, the like of which I have never seen. I have resolved to buy her for you, if you will permit. Jafar, of course, is delighted, and he says, yes, mother, please go ahead. I will sacrifice myself for you. Yes, because you can imagine, right, okay. Jafar's mother then tells Abbasa that the plan is perfect. And Abbasa dresses up as that slave girl. The night it's arranged, Jafar returns from the caliph's palace, and Jafar is, well, he's had his fill. All right? In other words, his vision is a little clouded. And so when he comes home, his mother presents to him this beautiful, ravishing woman, all veiled, of course. And indeed, Jafar is sufficiently blurred to enjoy himself and not notice that he's actually sleeping with his wife. Until it's done. And then Abbasa says, what do you think of the ruses of the daughters of king? And what do you mean, he says, thinking that perhaps she was a Byzantine slave. And she responds, I am your mistress, your wife, Abasa. Suddenly he's really sober. He went to his mother and he said, "What have you done? You have betrayed me." Abasa becomes pregnant and Jafar is killed. Oh, and then of course, Harun al-Rashid is sorry that he did that. So he kills the assassin too. Yes. Oh, it's so complicated. It's all so complicated. Now, the Barmecide family may have also brought the wrath of Harun al-Rashid for another reason. Because one day, a different story, Harun al-Rashid travels around Baghdad, and whenever he sees an impressive house, he says, "To whom does that belong?" It belongs to the Barmakis. "Oh, that's lovely. To whom does that belong?" "The Barmakis." To whom does that belong? The Barmakis. Indeed, although he had an army of 50,000 men in Baghdad, the man who led it was Jafar's brother, also a Barmaki. Indeed, the wealth and the generosity, the grandeur and the magnificence was so well known to the Barmaki that still today a symbol of generosity is to call someone a Barmaki. But it was this trip through Baghdad that gave Harun al-Rashid the idea that maybe, just maybe, this is not such a good thing. And so he had all the Barmaki arrested, most of them killed, and confiscated their wealth. In other words, what I'm trying to tell you is, don't play with politics. Avoid princes, avoid kings. Okay, sorry. Okay, anyway. Harun al-Rashid, again, was a great patron of the arts. Again, Baghdad reaches its great zenith at this particular time. And again, Harun al-Rashid was greatly loved and revered by his people. He maintained diplomatic relationships with the Chinese Tang emperor, and he also had diplomatic relationships with the new emperor in Europe, Charlemagne, again, the man who has created this large Frankish kingdom, which eventually becomes known as the Holy Roman Empire. And of course, what better way to seal a friendship than to exchange gifts? And so Charlemagne sent to Harun al-Rashid, sent him some Spanish horses, some Frisian cloaks, and some dogs, hunting dogs. Harun also sent gifts: silk, brass chandeliers, perfume, ivory chess pieces, a colossal tent of many colored curtains, and an elephant named Abdul Abdas. Plus a water clock that marked the hours by dropping bronze balls into a bowl. As mechanical knights emerged from little doors and pushed that ball into the water. Again, this is that Greek-Persian culture, inventive, clever, and now literally blossoming under this Abbasid control. And finally, in this world right here, the Frankish Empire, we also have the remnants of the Byzantine world. The empress at this time is Irene. And once again, the Muslims, the Abbasids this time, attack Constantinople. They attack Constantinople, and it appears that they might actually be able to capture the city. Or at least the Empress Irene is concerned that the city might be taken, and so therefore she sends ambassadors to Harun to arrange some sort of negotiation. He refuses anything except surrender. And then one of the ambassadors says to him, "The Empress has heard much of your ability as a general. Though you are her enemy, she admires you as a soldier." And that melts his heart. Oh, She appreciates me for what I am. This is good. This is good. Okay. So he changes his mind and he says, all right, tell the empress I will spare Constantinople if she will pay me 70,000 pieces of gold every year. If it is regularly paid, Constantinople shall not be harmed. And so the empress agrees. And so indeed, for many years, every year, 70,000 gold pieces would be sent in a great celebratory parade from Constantinople to Baghdad. To Baghdad, exactly. And when the gold arrived, it was a national holiday. Again, there were great celebrations, there were parades, the gold was delivered to the palace. Then the Byzantine soldiers were feasted, and then they were sent back on their way. This too is one of the reasons why Baghdad became so wealthy. The tremendous gold which flowed in from Byzantium every year. And I suppose this is probably a good time to say that next week we will once again have story time. All right. See you then. Thank you again very, very much. Have a wonderful weekend. That's where we're going. That's where we're going.